In the world of software development, before we had Agile or Scrum, there was this single, powerful idea: build software like you'd build a skyscraper. You finish one floor completely before you even start the next. Today, we're going back to basics and exploring that foundational blueprint, the waterfall model. So, what's on the docket? First up, we're going to get to the heart of what the waterfall model actually is. Then, we'll walk through the 5 distinct phases that, well, cascade from one to the next. We'll talk about its superpower, predictability, and figure out the exact kinds of projects where it really shines. And to wrap it all up, we'll see it in action with a real world example. Sound good? Let's dive in. All right, first things first. What exactly is the waterfall model? At its core, it's all built on this one simple but really rigid principle. It's a one-way street. So, this is a very traditional, very linear approach to building software. And the golden rule is super simple, but it's not flexible. You must fully complete one phase before you can even think about starting the next. There's no jumping ahead, and there's definitely no going back. It's all about structure and order. Honestly, the name itself is the perfect metaphor. Just picture a real waterfall for a second. Progress flows in only one direction, right? Downwards. Once you've gone over one cascade, there's absolutely no way to go back upstream to a previous stage. The path is set. So, what exactly are these cascades? Let's break down the 5 core phases that make up the backbone of this entire process, from start to finish. Here's the whole journey, right here. It all starts with requirements, which then flows into design, then development, followed by testing and deployment, and finally maintenance. And remember, each one of these is its own self contained world with its own goals. In that order, it's completely non negotiable. So, phase one, requirements analysis. Everything, and I mean everything, begins here. This is the bedrock of the whole project. The team sits down with the client to gather, analyze, and document every single need. This all gets compiled into a super important document called the Software Requirements Specification, or SRS. And you gotta understand, this isn't just a plan. It's basically the contract for the entire project, and it's set in stone. Okay, once that contract is signed and sealed, we flow right into the design phase. This is where the what from that big requirements document gets translated into the how. It's the blueprinting stage, right? The architects map out every single detail of the software structure before a single line of code ever gets written. And this design phase actually has 2 key parts. First, you've got your high-level design. Think of this as the 30,000-foot view, the overall system architecture, how the major pieces fit together. Then you zoom way in with the low-level design, which gets into the nitty-gritty details of every single component. This becomes the precise roadmap for the developers. With those blueprints finalized, we cascade down to development. This is the construction phase. The developers are like builders with a perfect set of instructions. They just take those detailed design documents and execute, writing the code and building the software, piece by piece, exactly as it was planned. So the code is written, job's done, right? Not even close. Now we enter the crucial testing and deployment phase. All those individual pieces of code get integrated into one system, and then it's tested like crazy to hunt down and squash every possible bug. Only when it passes this trial by fire is it deployed and handed over to the users. And because you can't go back and fix things easily, the testing has to be incredibly thorough. It usually happens in 3 stages. You've got alpha testing done by the internal team, then beta testing with a small group of real users, and finally the ultimate gateway, acceptance testing, where the customer themselves gives the official thumbs up. But the journey doesn't just stop at launch. The final and honestly often the longest phase is maintenance. This covers the entire life of the software after it goes live. Fixing bugs that pop up, adding small enhancements, and just making sure it keeps working as technology changes around it. So you're probably thinking, with such a rigid one-way street, why would anyone use this model? Well, it all comes down to one really powerful advantage: predictability. See, this predictability gives you a huge amount of control and clarity. Because the model's so simple, everyone knows exactly what's happening and when. Each stage has a crystal clear goal, so it's easy to track progress against your milestones. And this is a big one. It forces you to create amazing documentation, which reinforces that core discipline: define before you design and design before you code. Now, this super structured approach isn't for every project out there, not by a long shot. So, when is it the right tool for the job? When should a team actually decide to go with this particular flow? The waterfall model really shines in situations where there's a high degree of certainty. It's the perfect fit when your requirements are stable and totally clear from day one. Think about smaller projects where you're not expecting a lot of changes, the risks are already well understood, or when you absolutely need to produce strict documentation for things like regulatory compliance. Okay, let's make all this a little more concrete. How would this actually work in the real world? Let's take a pretty common example, building a brand new online food delivery system from scratch. The process would follow that strict linear path we've been talking about. In phase one, you define every single feature: user login, payment options, how menus work, everything. Then in phase two, you design the app's layout and all the technical architecture behind it. Only then, in phase three, do the developers start writing the code. Phase four would be all about testing, making sure ordering, payments, and the whole thing works flawlessly. And finally, phase five would be that long term maintenance, like adding new restaurants or fixing bugs after launch. It's a perfect illustration of that clear, logical progression from an idea to a finished product. At the end of the day, the entire philosophy of the waterfall model really just boils down to this simple but powerful idea. It forces a very specific kind of discipline. Figure out what you're building, then figure out how you're going to build it, and only then do you actually start building. And that brings us to our final thought. The waterfall model is fantastic for providing a clear, predictable, and really well documented